So when I'm talking programming, I'm talking, yes, physical aspects and physical components. How do we talk to the client? Like psychology is the biggest one. Physical is the lowest tier. And then working with them where they're at and how we kind of build them through to where they need to get to.
Hey, welcome to the Bodies Built Better podcast. I'm your host, Jackie Tan. I'm so grateful that you're joining me today. This show is all about human performance and everything that could possibly mean. So we look at the physical side of it. We look at the mental, emotional, spiritual, and everything in between, because I truly believe that everything that impacts the human experience will impact our performance. So we want to look at everything that will help you improve your experience, performance, and we want you to discover your extraordinary potential because we know you have it in you. And on today's episode, I welcome back my good friend, Josh Smith. We are talking about programming today. And I know what you might be thinking, because it was the same thing that Josh was thinking was, well, that's boring. But let me tell you something. When you program effectively, and when I'm talking about program, I'm talking about your training program, you can achieve incredible results. And the reason I say that is because only recently I found out that Josh had worked with one of his clients who had basically ruptured an ACL, torn the ACL, didn't have surgery, helped her with her training, and she's now in powerlifting competitions, and the ACL is still detached. Now, I don't know the degree of it, but in general, I mean, that sounds pretty unbelievably sensational to me. And if there is a way that I can be programmed, or my training can be programmed, that is going to get the most out of myself, even if I have whether it is an injury or discrepancy or whatever it is, I want that program. So I find it so fascinating that you can absolutely still achieve greatness no matter if there's an injury, no matter if there is something that's not quite attached to bone. So it's super interesting. We dive deep into Josh's programming methods, his thought process behind it, and how you can look at yours as well. So without further ado, let's dive straight into this one, programming with Josh Smith. I want to talk about programming because I think, well, firstly, there have been a few athletes now that I think I've seen who are your clients, where they have injured themselves, and more specifically, like ACL tears or like off the bone.
I call it a sustained ligament injury.
Yeah. Okay. Well, they've got that.
Yeah.
And they're continuing their training.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a story, and I feel bad because I don't remember her name. She was a power lifter.
Yana,
and she won, like, was it a state?
Top 5 in Canberra now.
And her ACL is
gone. MCL gone.
Yeah. Okay. So tell me about your program and how on earth you are helping people, get through these injuries and still show up and achieve these amazing results.
I want to clarify that the injuries weren't caused in the gym.
Exactly.
Let's clarify that.
I didn't do that.
Things happen and it hasn't been caused in the gym. But no, so going back to that, so from a Yana, for example, I talked about Yana. So Yana started training with me, I reckon, in 2011. And she's the partner of a mate of mine who was at soccer. And so I played on the same football team with him. And she would come out to watch games. And so Yana's like a 4'0" Vietnamese girl. And she would come out, and I'm not 4'6", right? And I'm very loud, double that. And so when I'm at the soccer pitch, I'm like rowdy, getting around it, whatever. Anyway, Jake says to her, for some of her training stuff, you got to go see Josh. And she's like, that bloke's scary as. And I was like,
which, to be fair,
it's fair. I get it. I was like, okay, I get it. Anyway, so then she started training. She ended up coming to see me and we're having a chat. And she's like, oh, I'll try it, come training wise. And so we started training. And she was like, she's super invested in women's empowerment, women in science and tech. So she's basically she's a scientist now, got a PhD. I think she's working for the UN. I think it's the UN, super fancy, can't talk about too much. But yeah, so at that time she was studying. And so she must have been in her master's. And anyway, I trained her through just from like strength perspective. Then we started doing some powerlifting. Then we started doing some like Olympic lifts. And like she loved it and trained me 2 or 3 times a week for years. Anyway, she got the offer to go to Italy for an exchange for 6 months as part of her research. And so this must have been as she was starting a PhD, I think it was. And so she's like, I'm on this exchange to Rome. Like, can you write me programs? I was like, absolutely. So she was doing stuff over in Rome, sending me photos of all the pasta she was having and all this kind of training she was doing when it was awesome. And then I get a message. So it's gone through, I think it was 6 months, and she was on her way back. And she's like, I'll see you next week, like super keen, no dramas. And then it must have been 4 or 5 days later, I get a text from her saying, we need to change the training up. I'm in hospital. I've just been airlifted to hospital. I was like, where? Why? What's happened? What's going on? She decided that on the way back, she was going to spend 2 days in the Alps before coming to Australia. And she went, as you do, right? And she ended up going skiing and completely shattered her knee skiing. So basically she was going, I can't remember exactly what happened, whether she had to avoid a tree or there was something that had happened. She tripped and flipped or something, but basically the boot stayed where it was and her leg kept going and just tore everything. And so what the injury was the trifecta, right? So it was like ACL gone, severed, MCL, and the lateral meniscus. Right, everything was just kaput. I believe I don't know if there was some PCL stuff as well, but it was like the most significant knee injury that I had seen at that time. And so she had gone to the hospital that's the same there. Then they'd flown her back here. She had a brace on. And she came back. We basically went through the options. And this is 2009, right? So we're talking 14 years ago. Or so hers was, like I said, 2011. It must have been 12 or 13. So maybe 10 years ago. And at the time, it was like only the beginnings of conservative management, meaning no surgery. And so she'd gone to see a surgeon. He was like, we've got to get you in for surgery. She didn't have private health. So she was like, well, what are the options without paying out of my nose for it? And he said, well, pay out your nose, or you can get on private health and then it'll be a year, but I don't recommend that, blah, blah, blah. Throughout the process, she's then gone to see a physio who was associated with a rock climbing gym. She's a rock climber as well. That was like, there's this thing about conservative management. We can see if we can work through it. Your coach and trainer sounds really good. Like if we work together, we can get through it. And I was like, sounds like a challenge. This is fantastic. And she's a woman in science. So she's like, test me, let's do this. Yeah. Right. So we then went through process of she'll see the physio, get assessed and tested for stability and strength and this kind of stuff, and we'll adapt the training for that. And then over the course of the next 12 months, by the time I got to her checkup, what was it? She went to see, it must have been a 9 month after the checkup. The surgeon has said to her, and I'm pretty sure I've got a screenshot and text somewhere. The surgeon has said to her, which knee was it? And then he said to her, oh, she said, this one. And he's like, oh, yeah, cool. Well, when we book you in for surgery. And she's like, I don't need it. You couldn't even tell which knee it was. It was super crazy. Yeah, right. So that to me was like, awesome. We can look at there's a few different things in that itself. If you can't tell which knee it is, there's no need for surgery, number one. But also at the time, we're kind of like working through this stuff. And so she basically hasn't had surgery. She's been 10 years. She's still climbing. And when she moved to Canberra for work, she took up powerlifting or ollie lifting over there with a coach over there. And she's absolutely nailed it. And she's now, I believe it's top 5 in Canberra for her snatches and her cleans and stuff. It's phenomenal. And throughout that process, there's a really interesting learning phase for me on how we go about the programming and the training, and what's required, and learning about, what actually happens at the knee or what happens around the knee to stabilize. And then from the physical aspect, kind of what I alluded to before, right? From the physical aspect, you also got to have good strength in the structures. So you got to have good nutrition, and then you got to have good recovery. So you got to have good sleep. Then you got to minimize your like stress level, so you can actually all these things like fall into place. So from that perspective is how I started to formulate how we go about managing injuries and acute injuries and things like that, like ACLs or back pain or concussions or whatever. There's a process that I take, and it's not just about the programming itself. There's a lot more to it.
Yeah.
So when I'm talking programming, I'm talking, yes, physical aspects and physical components. How do we talk to the client? Like psychology is the biggest one. Physical is the lowest tier. And then working with them where they're at and how we kind of build them through to where they need to get to. It's so Yana was fantastic. So that was cool.
Yeah, we'll dive deeper into that because it's important. But the psychology side of things is huge, and I experienced this. I mean, not to that degree whatsoever, but still, I mean, it just goes to show how much the mind can really play on you. Where I injured my neck a little while ago, and that took about probably 10 days to recover fully, so back into it. But I was probably back within 7 days to the gym. But even then, like you just wrap yourself in cotton wool and are just worried about every move you make. And when I went to see my physio, Patrick, legend, he basically said, keep moving. That's the most important thing. And that for me was a big game changer because, when you're injured and there's pain, you just want to do nothing and you want to protect it as much as possible. But actually that's going to make, I won't say make it worse, but it's going to make the healing process a whole lot longer and way more annoying. So that for me, that shift was really huge and beneficial. And I think that's why I recovered quickly. I mean, I remember, going into work and he's saying, "Oh, how's the neck?" I'm like, "Yeah, great." So it just goes to show, if you've got the right mindset, moving through rehab or whatever it is going to be way easier. So coming back to that story, so I really want to break down firstly the knee injury itself. But before we do, I think it's important to understand your programming as a whole approach. So can we break that down first?
Can you be more specific?
Well, you've mentioned, the whole, it's their psychology, the physical is the bottom rung. So what's the top rung? How do you start there and how do you get buy-in with your client?
Hearing them, hearing what they're feeling and hearing how they think about what's happened to them first and foremost. So for me, it's about cool injury, whatever it's going to be. I want to understand how they're responding to what's happened. Are they responding by wanting to protect it? Are they responding by wanting to like overcompensate? Like, let's get into it like right away. Are they responding by are they going to fear, or are they going into like, some type of anxiety? What's that look like? And so first of all, it's a conversation for me. That starts the programming in my brain. Is like, okay, where are they at? Hearing that first and foremost, and then understanding that where they're at, like deeply, not just going, oh yeah, I hear you're anxious about it, let's get moving again, right? Actually understanding and then thinking about what approach you might take with that person from a psychological perspective, from For me, it's like the words that I use, where I position my body when I'm talking to them. Like before I've even committed to this is the exercise we're going to do, it's like, okay, well, how am I going to get them through the exercise? Where do I need to be positioning myself, or what kind of response they need from me? What do they need to see from me to make sure they feel comfortable doing that? And how can I, build that trust with them if they're just coming in like, I had this injury, I heard you're good, come help me with it. How do I build that? It's like that first and foremost step. Generally, if it's someone that I've been working with, there's already that trust there. They're already able to communicate what they're feeling. That's the first step. Understanding it is the second one. Cool, I understand this is what's going on. So then I can go, if someone's in a fear state, I'm not going to try and feed into that more. I'm not going to try and put pressure on them. I'm going to try and reduce that fear through like a whole bunch of different things, different tactics that we use. And then acknowledging that as well, and acknowledging that this is shitty, but also you're coming to me because you want my professional opinion and you want my help. We can then action it, and providing them and having a discussion with them, but providing them what I see as the outcome. I've seen Yana completely like dangling from the knee, right? So I know what we can get to. I know what that can be, provided we're in a position where we can work together with that. If they're super fearful or they're super cautious or they're super anxious, we work in a different way. We set little milestones, or we said, oh guys, okay, the first step is getting you to do this again. Here's why we want to do that. And explaining that, what that process is going to look like. Generally now I'm able to explain to them and communicate to them what they're feeling before they even feel it, or what they might have been thinking and what they might have been feeling before even communicating it, because I've had that experience and I've had those conversations with like hundreds of people. So that automatically, as soon as someone can feel heard and understood and they're in a safe space that they're trusting in, then they're more likely to actually go like, oh, cool, I can actually do some stuff. I feel comfortable putting my trust and faith in this person or this gym or this setting, right? Your physio, like Patrick says to you, go move. You're like, oh, okay, cool. I can move again.
Right? Exactly. Yeah, that's it. But that comes with knowing someone and trust, right?
Yeah. It's empowering that person.
Yeah.
It's ensuring that you continue to empower them, because a lot of people don't, and a lot of people in their circles won't empower them. They will cotton wool them, and they'll feed into that. Oh my God, you rest. Oh my God, you got to have some muscle. Don't do much.
Don't do that. Did that hurt?
Don't do that. Oh, stop. And that's an anxiety thing, right? So it's minimizing that, and then on that note, is also helping them with those tools to work through that. I think we talked about it in one of the last ones about the way through conflict is communication. And so if you are in a setting where someone's like, oh my God, that's so sad. How are you feeling? I'm feeling really good, thanks. What I need from you is your support. Help me through this. And then you can start to think about, okay, what's the actual program going to look like? What do I want? When I say programming, what do I actually want you doing? Where are you at now? What are your pain tolerance, or what is your pain tolerance? What is your pain at? What's your movement capabilities? What's your range of motion? What's your strength like? Where do you feel things? Where do you not feel things? And then go through kind of like a systematic process of, are they feeling it front and back? Or are they feeling it when they move to the side? Or are they feeling in rotation? Which things can we do? Because the way I want to work through things from that perspective is getting them to do as much as they can up to and into discomfort, but not pain. And when you're thinking about, or when I'm thinking about a physical injury, I'm thinking about, okay, cool. Well, there's a range of movement that the joint or the body can do. Now, the initial ranges when starting the movement might be fine. The end ranges might be fine, but they might experience the pain in the middle. So how do we make sure we actually get moving through this part? And then how do we get them through moving through this part, like the beginning and the end? And then how do we assist them to like join those ends together over time? And so then all of a sudden, then over time, the range at the beginning gets greater, the range at the end gets greater, and then everything kind of meets up and then have no issues anymore. You kind of iron it out.
There's a bit there. What I find interesting, firstly, you said, when they're communicating with the people around them, it's like, I need your support. It's really, I think, important to clarify what that support looks like. This is what I need from you.
Yes.
And this is what it sounds like.
Oh, yes.
Like, yeah. The other thing you mentioned, let's go to discomfort. I think it's such an interesting thing. and it requires a level of body awareness as well to understand the difference between discomfort and pain.
Yeah.
And that fine line between, mentally going, this is uncomfortable, I'm still safe, or this is pain and this is, we don't want to be in this territory.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting. And I would love to know how you deal with that with clients. And it just came to me now. The other thing was the clients who generally speaking, they're athletes because they need to get back out doing the thing they need to be doing. They're like, right, let's do it. I'll do anything you say. I need to do it right now, every day. Do you know what I mean? So how you deal with those clients as well when they're just like, give it to me right now. I need to be good by tomorrow.
Right. The discomfort one's simple. For me, it's simple. The way I explain it.
For you, it's
for me. It's for me. It's simple to explain it, and the way I explain it simply, and that I found has got the best response is that discomfort you can still move through voluntarily. Pain, your body will shut you down. Right? You know pain because your body will be like, I'm not going there, and something will happen that is outside your normal range of motion or your normal movement. Like if you touch a hot stove, you will involuntarily pull away, right? That's pain. But if it's a warm stove, you can put your hand on it until you're ready to move through it. Oh, that's discomfort. I'm gonna take that away now. It's conscious versus unconscious. So pain is you react involuntarily. Discomfort is you can still move through it.
So is there anything to say about the person who goes, that stove is really hot, let's just take that piece of food that flipped up?
I mean, if they get the food, depends how long they're holding it on there for,
every time. I don't know why I haven't learned that lesson. Adam's like, you burnt yourself again.
It's a challenge. I saw a challenge in front of me, right? I saw the challenge and my body.
I
accept it, and I felt the pain. I don't know. Next time it has to be warmer. Okay. All right. So that's pain v discomfort.
Cool.
The second thing being, how do I slow people down, is more so about communicating the need and the why I need them to slow down, rather than kind of like just holding them back on shit and giving them things that are, below their threshold, right? So if I've got someone, I got a few who are like, done this, want to get back to doing stuff, right? Like, what I look at is, cool, we need you to get back to doing stuff as quick as possible. Means we've got to basically close that gap between beginning and the end range of motion or whatever the injury is as quick as possible. In order to do that, you need to understand the body has to go through a healing process. Here's how quick muscles heal. Here's how quick ligaments can heal. Here's how this happens, blah, 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 blah. And provide them that understanding. And so they know that, cool, this is what we're going to be doing for this joint, this injury, whatever it may be, but I can still push you in other ways. And that's where you're going to get it. So they're still going to get the challenge, because what they want is the challenge to get back to where they're at, right? Awesome. You got a knee injury, for example. We can still do the assault bike, just upper body only. And they're like, oh, okay, cool. Get them on there. And you realize this is actually really bloody hard. So that becomes a new challenge whilst they're healing elsewhere. And then when they feel like, they might be able to put some movement onto it or put some load onto it, then we can start going, cool, now your challenge is, challenge yourself here with this other stuff. But now it is, how do we get load into that? Because you're an athlete or because you respond quickly to the physical training because you've had history in it, it's going to happen quicker, but we've got to make sure that we're doing it in the right ways, because you're going to experience pain quicker if you overload than if you underload, so I got to find that middle range, which is like, this is enough for you, but also this is enough for your body.
That is so sensational. And you're giving people something tangible to work with. I mean, people love numbers. I'm not one of them. But if you were to tell me that this is the amount of days generally it takes for muscles to heal or ligaments or whatever you've done, I go, oh, cool. There's an end point where you would think then, okay, I should be starting something by that date. Yeah. Or I should be feeling something different.
Yes.
Or be able to move differently.
It's very much a criteria, like it's very much here's a general number of days or weeks or whatever it may be. And then by that time, we should be able to see this. And then we shift that focus. This is what we're focusing on, the criteria, which is you should be able to squat again or should be able to move again through that range, whatever that may be.
Yeah.
So they kind of they can marry those two up. Yeah, that's exactly right. So this is fun. That's more challenging than trying to push someone forwards.
Yeah.
If someone's super hesitant to move through things, rather than trying to be overzealous, it's harder to slow down the one who's overzealous and to try and actually get them looking after themselves than it is to like work through and make someone move at a threshold that is appropriate for where they're at. You know, if they need to be pushed a bit more.
What do you do with that person? Because there are a few people that come to mind who experienced an injury and have been really fearful of moving through it. And I know you just explained your protocols and stuff, but what does that conversation really look like? How do you nurture that process with them? Because that's the state that they kind of are always in, or that's the approach. Could you say approach? But that they take when dealing with something like this.
If they're like fearful or anxious, is understanding why. I think. Not I think I know, is understanding why and ensuring that the space that you create for them is safe. Like at the end of the day, we've got three main needs, right? Primal needs: safety, sustenance, sex, right? So take it back to the beginning. If we can make sure that they have a safe space to come to, whether that's the gym, whether that's their own gym, whether it's their training place at home, whatever that may be, if we can ensure that that is a safe space them they can go into, they can feel comfortable, they can relax, they can work at their pace, and they can also be encouraged to work a little bit more. That's how I would start that conversation. So what is a safe space for them? And that feeds into a whole bunch of other different conversations or avenues on conversation where you get to know a bit more about the person themselves and their lifestyle. You know, is their work super stressful? Is their home life super stressful? Do they have things that they're anxious about in general? Do they have money worries? Do they have lifestyle worries? Like all these kinds of things feed into that as well, because you're not just working with the injury, you're working with the person. And the person is a product of everything that happens around them. So you have to kind of understand what's happening around them, so you know where you can actually seek outcome and where you actually have to kind of be like, well, I'm not going to push you on these things. You know, if money's a stress, you're not going to be like, pay me up front for all my work. You know what I mean? You're going to kind of work in a way that is manageable for that, so it's not a stress. You know, and that's obviously freedoms that you have with running the business and whatever. But you know, understanding that person's whole encompassing lifestyle allows you to help work through the injury itself.
Amazing. And that's so fantastic, because you're really taking in that holistic approach, which I feel like I have to mention though, like, you know, if you're injured right now, please see a professional in terms of how you go about moving forward. Just because we're like, move, it's good for you. That's not like you need to see.
Seek someone that can actually guide you, that is trained in the physical arts. Great disclaimer. We can move forward.
I'd love to know, because I'm a bit of a obviously anatomy nerd. How do you go about the knee? You've mentioned before with Yana, you know, you've got to understand how the knee works, everything in around it. How do you go about rehabbing?
That's a very loaded question. It's a very complex question. Simply, I go, it's a hinge joint that is sandwiched in between a ball and soccer and a horseshoe, right? So you got your hip and you got your ankle, and the knee just kind of goes forwards and backwards in that motion. And those two are the ones that you need to really worry about, because that's where dysfunction is going to occur first. Dysfunction is not going to occur at the knee if there's an injury to the knee, because what the body will do subconsciously is protect the knee. So we'll minimize range of motion or minimize the strength or load going through that and present elsewhere. And so the way I work with the knee is I don't work with the knee. I look at the ankle or the hip, and what's happening there, and then work through that, through those areas, whichever may present as the problem child to start with. And then from that, it's like, cool. Once we fix that dysfunction or what that movement compensation may be, then we can start working through the knee. Then we can start working through range of motion. So, first of all, it's range of motion, get that back, or decrease the inflammation to get range of motion. And then it's like strength. This is normal sort of programming strength and then power. The way I think about any kind of human movement is 3 planes of motion. So we're looking at doing things front and back, like forwards and backwards, side to side, and in rotation. So ideally the knee doesn't rotate or over rotate because it's a hinge joint, but you still need like frontal plane and rotational stability, but that also comes from ankle and hip. Mm-hmm. So if you can build them in there, generally you can actually build it into the knee. And like I said before, with like the beginning of movement, the injury, and then the end of movement injury, it's the same thing in that sequence. For me, it's like the beginning is the ankle, force displacement or absorption, and then you've also got the hip at the other end. So the knee just sits in the middle there. So if we can work through these and make sure these are good, whilst also looking at range of motion, active and passive, at the knee itself, we can actually build that strength back together.
Sensational.
You're welcome.
I would love to know when, and I don't know if this is your domain, but when do you start programming the sport-specific stuff? So we go, this is rehab, this is about strength and flexibility, get that first. At what point do you go, right, now we're good to go for sport-specific?
There is no point. So we work with physio, right? So as part of Martel's performance group, we've got the physio and we've got AS&C coaches and performance coaches, and we work together. And when I say there is no point, is that what we're seeking to do is eliminate the word rehabilitation from helping an injury. Because at the end of the day, if you say to someone you're in a rehab phase, they think they're in a rehab phase and they only focus on that injury. We want you to focus on your movement. We want you to focus on your person, right? And so it's like, cool, this injury has limited what you can do from a functional perspective. So we're just trying to build back function. So what our physio does is they'll go see them acute injury. He'll go through, awesome, here's what's happening, blah, blah, blah. Here's a list of exercises that I think they need. And what we do is we take that and then we plug it into our training programs. And so they're not in a rehab phase. They're just a modified training program from what you were doing, not from what someone else is on. So it's just training, keep training. So there's no point at which is sport specific. I love that. Thank you.
And you're right. Again, it comes back to that psychology, the mindset of it all. Yeah.
I do want to say on that as well, though, like obviously as we build function back, then you can do more things.
Yeah, of course.
So there is a point that, yes, your training becomes more intensive, more complex, more game-based, but that is dependent upon when the function comes back. So there is a point at which you will go back to sport and back to training, but it's very much criteria-based. So we very much see where you're at, what you can do, how you're thinking about it, how you're feeling about it, and then we move from there. So there's no set point. Like that from a programming perspective and from a training perspective, what I'm trying to, let's say ACLs, for example, right? There's a huge amount of fear out there, right? And what we're trying to do is minimize that fear of either sustaining an injury or having a surgery or going through conservative management and making sure that people go, it's just another injury. The same fear isn't there with a hamstring pull, right? Or some type of low back pain, right? People aren't like, oh my God, like, are you know, I want to remove that. And we want to remove that. And so it's really interesting. You're asking about what's the programming approach. And I posted fairly recently about my who-are approach to programming, dealing with injuries. And that is that herd, if someone sustains an injury, they come to you, hear them, understand them, acknowledge what's happened, and then go straight to action, right? And that comes through, the conversations that we said. And it was really interesting. One of our players had a surgery yesterday on an ACL to repair that. And she's like, I messaged you straight afterwards. She messaged me. I messaged her in the morning, like, how you feeling? Yeah, great. Just want to get it done now. And then messaged her. She sent me a photo afterwards, like in the dressing gown, like still recovering from, the surgery. She was probably, I reckon she would have been about 2 hours out of surgery. and she's like keen to get back in it. Surgeon's super happy with how everything's gone. Her partner messaged me and was like, she's trying to walk around. The physio's trying to hold her back, and she's walking around and like, this is great. There's no fear there, right? And that's obviously that's come through a lot of our conversations in the lead up. We knew what was happening. We've been training for it, but I see that and I'm like, this is awesome. It's just the next step. Like, she decided that she wanted surgery. Fantastic. What's the next step? She's not getting caught up in it too much. Yes, there's some anxiety about surgery itself. What's going to happen? How am I feeling? Blah, blah, blah. But it's like, cool. How do we get through this? Because this isn't going to define you. You're back in the gym next week. That's what I said to her. I'll see you next week for some upper body work. She's like, yep, done. Amazing. And so if there is any takeaways from this, for me, it's like reducing the fear and anxiety that surrounds this particular injury that is prevalent in the media, that is prevalent in the papers, because they get oxygen from it. From a story's perspective, they create fear and people want to read about this stuff. Oh my God, so-and-so had this happen to them. And then they get the players and then they like expand on how they're feeling. It's so sad. It's career defining. It's not. And if you have trusted professionals around you and you are working in a way that actually works with the person, you can come back quicker. You can return as if you would have, provide everything is done correctly with that person. To me, it's like, cool, it's happened. Let's move forward. Right. Rather than having this whole anxiety, fear about it. There's like groups out there. And back in the day, I was like, cool. I joined some of the, what they call like the ACL club groups, right? Facebook or social media, whatever. I'm like, cool, this is cool. I get it. But also it just reinstills the fear. It reinstills that I've had this happen to me. Cool. We need to acknowledge what's happened and we need to move forward from that. So being part of an ACL club, I think is probably one of the hardest things. Like, for support, yes, but to define yourself and part of your identity by that, I think, man, there's like so much more you can be defined by, and moving through that. And there's a point where, okay, it's not just support now, people are having a whinge about things and you feed into that. Oh, I feel the same. Oh, I can't do that. Guess what? Tell me what you can do. Let's move forward from that. So for me, I think the takeaway is like, we need to reduce the fear and the stigma and the anxiety that comes from this stuff. This is a injury that happens, same as concussions, same as hamstring pulls, same as, everything that happens in sport. We just need to work through it better with our people. And we need to work through it and help minimize the fear and anxiety that comes from that, so we get better outcomes, because everyone in that circle ideally wants to play back to their best, wants them feeling confident, wants them feeling strong and powerful and being able to go, yeah, cool, that happened. And now I'm doing this again. I think that's a big key for me and how we're trying to work through things as well. And so that would be my take this away, is that, minimize the fears and minimize the anxieties through the words and actions that we're taking, because it's just leading into negativity right now.
Yeah, that's so beautifully put as well, in terms of, redefining ourselves, because you've said it, like, especially with athletes, there's so many more amazing things that they've done. Why would you want to remember an injury as being defined by an injury? Yeah. And I think it's so important to reframe it and bring the incredible aspects to the forefront of what an athlete has achieved. The other thing I want to touch on is re-injury, reoccurrence of the same injury. Yes. And how you deal with that, especially the mindset of that, because, thinking that someone, or thinking they have done everything they have, possible to get the best outcome, and then it happens again. How do you move through that with someone?
Touch wood, I haven't had to do that in 10, 12 years. None of them. Yeah. None of that I know of. I mean, it might have happened and they haven't told me. They never came back. But like, I can probably think of 7 or 8 people off the top of my head with re-injury rates at 24 months being 3x or whatever. I've had none that have sustained it same on the same side or the contralateral side, which I'm super proud of.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's huge.
Yeah, so I'm super proud of that. And I don't really talk about that. I don't really think about it too much. But for me, for those who do sustain an injury and how would we work through that, we would seek to understand what happened or why things might have happened. Did they get tackled wrong, or did they hit something in the ground? Is there a cause for it that is not down to them going, I fucked up through my training and through my return, because that's the hardest part, is that if you then take it on board as like, this is because something I did or didn't do, that becomes a lot harder. And so going through that process, I'd look back and be like, cool, what was the injury mechanism this time, or what do we think it might have been? Did we see any deficits in your movement? If it was someone that we'd work with, we wouldn't clear them if we saw deficits in their movement or in their in asymmetry. So how to work through that? It's understanding again. Understanding what happened, how they're feeling. Was there some other factors that might have come in place? And then moving forward to that, it's the same as what I said. Hearing what they're feeling. If they're upset by it, or they're like, oh, it is what it is, whatever. You can look at re-injury rates and be like, well, you fit in with the statistics, or there's a reason for this as an individual, and we tend to go towards the individual side of things. So hopefully we keep our 100% success rate.
What if it's not? What if that athlete wasn't with you for their first round, and then they've come to you, heard you are amazing,
can do some things, and then
and I don't want to get injured again. Then what?
And then it happens again. Is that what you
mean? They've injured themselves. That process was taken care of with another professional. It's happened again, and now they're seeing you. What's your approach?
100% look at their movement patterns to start with. But also that's for them individually, but also understand once again, the lifestyle, training load, what are they doing? What type of surfaces do they play on? What type of shoes do they wear? How do they move in those shoes? How do they move at trainings and whatnot? To really try and understand, okay, cool, well, it's happened a second time and that's why you're here. Why or what factors can we change straight away? The amount of conversations and input we've had to have in regards to changing shoes that are old, or getting support, go see a podiatrist, or modifying a movement pattern, or I don't want to say fixing, but helping to like a weight shift or something like this has been a lot, so that's where I would start with that. Okay, it's happened again. There's a reason for it now. It could just be 2 freak tackles, but at the end of the day, it's generally, if we're talking non-impact, we look at those things for sure. And then look at, I'll take them out to the field, show me some of these things, show me how you're moving. Or ideally, if they've sustained an injury, we'll work through that. But we just try and rebuild from where they're at, and I want to see like what I like to call like optimal function as much as possible. But then as we go through that training, when we put them under load, or when we put them in complex situations where it's decision making or agility or whatnot, how does that movement look? And ideally, if we've got footage from previously or from their previous training, fantastic. We can actually be like side by side, here's where you're at. But it does make it hard. If it's happened, they've been sorted, and it happens again, to me, I want to try and seek to understand why, how, when, where, whatever. Like, one of the guys that we work with, he'd had 2 previous and then sustained a 3rd, and then came to see us, and worked with him for a couple of years. And it's been 5 years since we stopped working with him, and he's been fine, that I can see. Shout out Dan. It's like, and when he came in, I was like, cool, we can see how you're presenting, we can see what you're doing with things. So I don't think I can provide anything more. It comes back to that process of where they're at, what's their lifestyle like, what's their life like, what their stress is like, and how they're moving when we see them. Unless we've got footage of it happening, it's hard to be like, this is exactly, we can only do the best we can. And yeah, that's where we work through.
Amazing. I feel like if there's people out there like, I need to see Josh, you should be telling us how they can get in touch with you. And more importantly, can they work with you if they're not in the same state?
100%. We've 100%. So best way to get in touch with me is via email. You get my out of office, but I'll get back to you. So it's josh@mytizperformancegroup.com.au. You can follow us on Instagram at mytizperformancegroup. Facebook is Josh Mytize or at Mytize Performance Group, MITISE. That's how to get in touch, yeah. And email is the best way to get in touch and providing, background of what's happened. Then we'll basically go through a call or some type of communication. And then if you are interstate or even overseas, our training platform allows us to sort of work remotely. It's not our preferred option because we like to see things in person. It just means you have to take a lot more videos and send them through to us. That's all that is. And we have worked with other professionals interstate as well to be like, cool, here's some things that we want to see. And it's a synergistic relationship. We don't work with combative relationships where you got competing ideas. So more than possible to make all that work.
Amazing. This is wonderful. When I was thinking if I need to do a strength program episode, and of course it was you, I didn't realize it would be this good. So thanks for that.
Thank you very much for having me again. I appreciate it. Hope I brought some insight. Get in touch.
That was Josh Smith. What are your thoughts on programming around injury? I had no idea that, firstly, that you could strength train in a way that would still allow you to do things around an injury. That blows my mind. I mean, obviously, I'm very well aware that the body is capable of such extraordinary things. And this, for me, just proves it, which is why I love exploring these things. So tell me, have you trained through injury? How's your process been? And of course, if you are dealing with something and not sure how to get back into training, then make sure you get in touch with Josh because he's the master of it all. So his contact details will be in the show notes. Let me know how you go and if you're thinking about changing maybe what's in your program and how you develop your programs as well. If you love this episode, if you love, that was a little bit of Sean Connery, don't you think? If you love this episode, maybe not, maybe that's just a really terrible accent. Anyway, if you did love this episode, I would truly appreciate you sharing this with your friends and leaving a review or subscribing to this channel. It all really helps this channel grow and get in front of more people, and I'm truly grateful for that. Have the best day, week, month, and year. Stay awesome, and I'll catch you next time.